Hello, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you a summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the eve of November 29, 2023 in the United States, the morning of November 30th, 2023 in the Middle East. It is also 8 a.m. in the Middle East. I mentioned that because some of the developments I'm going to talk about have occurred in the last 2 hours and some are still unfolding. Starting with the truce between the two sides and the hostage negotiations. 16 hostages were released today from captivity in the Gaza Strip, and 30 Palestinian prisoners were released from jails in Israel. Amidst the hostages that were released, 12 of them were Israeli citizens, 4 of them were Thai citizens. Amidst the Israelis, 10 were part of the deal between Israel and Hamas, 5 were women, 5 were minors, the youngest of them was a 13-year-old girl. And in addition to them, 2 other women that hold Israeli-Russian citizenship were released without Israel paying any price for them, quote-unquote, as a gesture to Russia. Musa Abu Marzouk, who's one of the leaders of Hamas, stated that their release is a gesture to the admirable position of President Putin. This is the second time that Hamas has released people from captivity because they hold Russian citizenship. One of the women that was released today appeared in a movie that Hamas had released from captivity several weeks ago, and it is reported that many of their family members were left behind as well. Amidst the Palestinian prisoners who were released, there was also Ahed Tamimi. I mentioned her several days ago. She's a 22-year-old Palestinian who's somewhat of an icon among the Palestinians for defying the Israeli occupation in the West Bank. And in addition to her, Suhir Barghouti, whose late husband, Omar Barghouti, was released in a previous hostage exchange before he was again arrested. He was a commander of Hamas's military wing in the West Bank, and he died in 2021. She was released as well. In addition, 7 of the Palestinians who were released hold Israeli citizenship as well. This is critically important because historically Israel has refused in any hostage exchange with Palestinian organizations to release anyone from jails who has Israeli citizenship. Israel has proudly forgone that. 7 of the prisoners who were released today have Israeli citizenship. In addition, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's military wing, the Al-Quds Brigades, announced that some of the hostages that were released today were held by the group. Relating to some of the additional details that are coming out regarding the hostage situation, Hamas stated today, not through its usual channels, that the women and children of the Bivas family, I reported about them several days ago, were killed in an Israeli bombing. This is the youngest people in captivity. It's a 10-month-old baby, 4-year-old brother, and the 2 parents. According to reports several days ago, Hamas had handed them over to the Popular Front of the Liberation of Palestine. Today, it was rumored by Hamas that they were killed. It was not said in their official channels. Israel stated that they are investigating the matter. It is also noteworthy that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad several weeks ago stated that some woman had been killed in captivity, and she was then released alive several days ago. In addition, there are also reports regarding those who had been freed, that the minors and children that came back are also malnourished, and some of them have lost between 7 to 15 kilos. In addition, it was reported today that Russia is increasing its activity in order to pressure Hamas to release different citizens, some of them with Russian citizenship, some of them who are simply Holocaust survivors or the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. These statements were made specifically by the Russian ambassador in Israel. In addition, it was reported today that the U.S. is pressuring Qatar in order to in turn apply pressure on Hamas to allow the Red Cross to visit those who are left behind. However, this pressure has not led to anything. So according to in different reports, Israel had stated that part of the deal that was made 6 days ago is that the Red Cross will be allowed to visit the captives that are remained behind and transfer medicines to them. Hamas said that was not part of the deal. Hamas has not allowed this. The United States is trying to put pressure on Qatar in order to facilitate this, so far to no avail. Moving on to the future of the truce and possible continued hostage exchanges, the truce has now been extended by another 24 hours. However, it was very close to breaking down. It was due to expire an hour and a half ago, and 15 minutes before it expired, the two sides managed to find a way in order to extend it. So right now there's a total of roughly 145 hostages that remain in captivity in the Gaza Strip. According to the IDF, the number had increased. The IDF has now identified that 5 more Thai citizens and 1 more Israeli citizen that up until now has been presumed missing are held in captivity. Of these, there are 25 who meet the criteria of the current truce, 21 women and 4 minors. Throughout the day, there was lots of reports regarding if the truce is going to be extended. Each side was trying to one-up the other one, and the truce was very close to breaking down. The Washington Post, they reported about the meeting that occurred yesterday in Doha between the head of the Mossad, the head of the CIA, the Egyptian Secretary of Intelligence, and the Prime Minister of Qatar. According to those negotiations, the sides agreed on breaking down the remaining hostages to 5 different categories. These are Israeli men that are beyond the age of serving in the military, so beyond the age of reservist duty, then female soldiers, then potential reserve soldiers, so those Israeli males that are potentially could be drafted in the military, then the enlisted soldiers, males, who were kidnapped, and then the dead bodies. And the sides have agreed that when they negotiate, this is going to be the breakdown. AFP then announced in the early morning hours that Hamas is prepared to extend the truce by 4 days, which is the maximum of the original deal. However, throughout the day, there was no extension of the deal officially. Israel then stated that even though this is the last day of the truce, if Hamas does transfer a list of 10 names that meet the criteria that will be released tomorrow, de facto the truce will be extended. Then, as the hours grew closer and closer towards the truce expiring, both sides escalated their rhetoric, and each one said that they're prepared to return to fire. Israel said that by 7 a.m. it is going to open fire in the Gaza Strip. Hamas also said that the Al-Qassam Brigade's military wing is prepared to open fire. Then, several hours before the truce was due to expire, Hamas transferred a list of 10 names. However, these included 7 women and 3 bodies, the people who either died in captivity or bodies that Hamas had kidnapped after they were killed on October 7th. Israel rejected this, stated that we will not accept that Hamas does not know where the women and children are, or we're not going to negotiate a new deal while ignoring the remaining women and children in the deal, and that Israel believes that Hamas can release at least 20 more people who meet the criteria. Both sides stated that they are prepared to return to fighting 15 minutes before the truce was going to expire at 6:45 a.m. in the Middle East. The IDF updated that the truce is going to be extended, and the Israeli government has since stated that Hamas sent an updated list that matches the criteria. So right now, the truce is extended by another 24 hours. This also means that humanitarian aid is going to continue to flow in as the truce stipulates, and that these hostages are going to be released. We will see what happens 24 hours from now. Moving on to the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip, this was the second day of a substantial violation of the truce. The IDF reported that in several incidents, IDF soldiers were fired upon while they were within the truce lines. The IDF retaliated against the areas that Hamas operatives were firing on them, and 3 Hamas operatives were killed. In addition, the IDF reported that warning shots were fired by the Israeli Navy against fishing boats that were violating the no-go zones in the seas off the coast of Gaza. Relating to the future of the fighting, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Minister Gantz, and Defense Minister Gallant all stated today separately that regardless of when the truce ends, when it does end, Israel is going to return to fire in full force, setting its sights on the southern parts of the Gaza Strip as well. Responding to the mounting U.S. pressure on Israel to find some way to guarantee the security, to the extent possible, of civilians in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, Israeli officials stated today, and I'm quoting, we will have to take steps to ensure civilians are out of danger as much as possible. We need to ensure there are enough places where they can be safe and call upon civilians to evacuate to those areas. In the south, they will have to move only a kilometer north or west towards the sea or to the south. We are optimistic that we can continue the operation and ensure it will not be different than the achievements in the north. So this means that Israel is actually feeling the pressure of the United States, is trying to find mechanisms how they are actually going to maintain the achievements as far as the IDF is concerned in the north, while actually ensuring that there's not a similar mass uprooting of Palestinians as we saw in the first weeks of the war. Regarding the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, there was no reports today about the amount of trucks that entered. However, the UN did state that the number had significantly increased compared to before, presumably as the last couple of days, the number matches what was supposed to enter, which is 200 trucks of humanitarian aid carrying food, water, and medical supplies, as well as 4 trucks of fuel and 4 trucks of natural gas and cooking gas. And the UN also reported that the trucks had managed to reach the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Red Crescent today reported that since the truce began, a total of 1,028 trucks of humanitarian aid has entered the Gaza Strip. Moving on to the West Bank today, there was substantial IDF activity reported in Jenin refugee camp, in which Mohammed Zbeidi, who's a relative of a prominent prisoner, Zakaria Zbeidi, in Israel, and Mohammed Zbeidi is known as a leading figure in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, he's also known as the commander of Jenin, was assassinated. Along with him, his deputy, Hussam Hanoun, was also assassinated. The operation, according to the IDF, lasted all night, and in it, 17 Palestinians were also arrested. Additional reports later came in stating that in this operation, a 15-year-old Palestinian and an 8-year-old Palestinian were also killed in the Jenin refugee camp. Responding to this, the IDF stated that they had thrown explosive devices at the forces, and the forces retaliated. In addition, there's also reports coming in the last hours that there's substantial IDF activity in the Tulkarm area. Throughout the day, videos were disseminated showing Israeli settlers last night, dressed as soldiers, had raided a Palestinian village in the Jordan Valley, and that several Palestinians were shown in the video beaten, and their areas and homes were ransacked. Somewhat related to this, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, stated that the U.S. has called upon Israel to use all means to protect civilians while exercising the right to defend itself against terrorism, and she added, relating to the West Bank, the U.S. is deeply concerned about the sharp rise in settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank and opposes settlement expansion. So there's been constant reports about increased settler terrorism against Palestinians. The U.S. is again stating this time in the UN forum. In addition, minutes before recording this, there's a report of a shooting attack that occurred in the entrance to Jerusalem. According to the very, very initial reports, 2 attackers were shot dead after they had managed to injure 6 different Israelis at the entrance to Jerusalem, and there's already a report of a 16-year-old girl who was killed and 1 who is critically injured. So again, that number is likely to change. This all happened in the last several minutes. There are no reports, for the first time since the war began, regarding the north of Israel. There's no reports regarding any violations of the ceasefire, even though there's no actual agreed upon ceasefire. Both sides completely respected it in the last 24 hours, and no incidents were reported. Moving on to the regional developments, the U.S. warship USS Carney intercepted a drone today that was launched from Yemen towards the Bab el-Mandab Straits. There are no reports where this drone was headed. However, there have been lots of increasing attacks against different ships that have some affiliation with Israel. Likely this has something to do with that. There was a report in the New York Times today that President Biden's administration had plans for substantial retaliation against the Houthis and different Iraqi militias in response to all their attacks in the last 6 weeks. However, this was canceled due to fears that Iran would intercept this as launching a regional war and may retaliate, escalating the situation much more than the United States intended. Somewhat relating to this, the Saudi Crown Prince today, Mohammed bin Salman, made an offer to Iranian President Raisi, in which he stated that Saudi Arabia will substantially increase its investments in Iran and will develop economic cooperation with the country if Iran will agree to restrain its affiliated militias in the region. So the report that stated this also added this is part of the U.S. attempts to try to de-escalate the region and try to avoid a regional war. Unclear if the United States actually asked Saudi Arabia to do this or if this is just part of their negotiation. That offer was made today. Moving on to some of the political and general trends that occurred, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres today stated that, and I'm quoting, "There are lots of testimonies regarding sexual violence during the despicable acts Hamas committed on October 7th, and they must be thoroughly examined and the perpetrators brought to justice. Sexual violence must be condemned anywhere and any time." So there's been a lot of protests and condemnation in Israel and in different diplomatic channels of the fact that a lot of the UN's women's rights organizations have not actually come out and condemned Hamas's sexual violence in the attack on October 7th. This seems to be a response to this. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, stated pretty much that this was too little too late. He stated that this message is very weak and that only when it is Israeli women can you wait 60 days before you come out with some sort of condemnation saying that the matter has to be investigated. Other political news, France announced today that it is considering personal sanctions against Hamas members as a result of the violence on October 7th, and also that it is considering similar sanctions against settlers carrying out terrorism in the West Bank. And in other political news, Politico today reported quoting members of the Biden administration in which they stated that President Biden is frustrated with Netanyahu, and they related to a statement that Biden made several days ago when he was asked, would the United States ever consider conditioning the aid it gives to Israel on Israel abiding with certain demands of the United States? And President Biden said it's something to think about. According to the reports in Politico, this was not a real threat. However, it does reflect Biden's feelings that Netanyahu cannot be trusted and that he has not always been focused on releasing hostages. And in addition, Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel today in order to help facilitate the ongoing negotiations regarding the truce. And in addition, President Biden's special envoy for hostages, Roger Carstens, also arrived in Israel and is going to join Blinken. Moving on to the reports on the future of the Gaza Strip, there was a statement today made by the Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas in which he called on the convening of an international conference in order to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The statement stated that Palestinians are willing to work with the international community on a serious political process that will lead to an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. Mostly what we take away from this is the Palestinian Authority is trying more and more to put itself on the map after different elements in the UN, the United States, the EU all say the Palestinian Authority or some sort of revitalized or rejuvenated Palestinian Authority should take control of the Gaza Strip, and Israel has said that is absolutely not going to happen. The Palestinian Authority is starting to try to put itself on the international map, say actually we do want this to happen, and these are the mechanisms with which the international community can apply pressure on Israel in order to make that happen. That is my report for the last 24 hours. Again, I remind that the attack that occurred in Jerusalem happened moments ago, so the numbers are likely to change, and the truce was agreed upon only roughly an hour and a half ago, an hour and 45 minutes ago, so it is unknown how it is going to develop. I'll be back tomorrow.